Chapter 1. The Night of the Crime. The rain fell heavily over the city, washing the streets and reflecting the streetlights like distorted stars. Max Hartman, a hard-faced private detective with a piercing gaze, lit a cigarette while watching the city from his window. He knew that tonight would not be ordinary, but he had no idea how extraordinary it would become. His phone rang, the sharp sound breaking the silence of the office. Max answered, hearing the nervous voice of Lieutenant Brown on the other end of the line. "Hartman, we've got a complicated case. A business mogul, Victor Lang, has been found dead in his apartment. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses. We need you here now." Max extinguished his cigarette and grabbed his coat. Lang was a well-known name, but not for the best reasons. He knew he was about to dive into a sea of intrigue. Upon arriving at the luxurious building in the city center, Max was greeted by the doorman, an elderly man who looked more frightened than anything else. "Detective, it's on the 10th floor, apartment 1010, he said, his voice trembling. Max entered the elevator, feeling the weight of responsibility increase with each floor. Upon reaching the apartment, he found a scene worthy of a nightmare. Victor Lang was sprawled on the living room floor, his eyes wide open and a look of shock frozen on his face. There was no blood, just the motionless body and a deafening silence. "What do we have here, Brown?" Max asked as he inspected the scene. "It's a mystery, Hartman. No broken windows, no forced doors. He was alone when it happened." "We found this," said Brown, handing over a broken pocket watch, stopped at 3:15. "It doesn't belong to him. We asked the staff, and no one has ever seen this watch before." Max took the watch, examining it closely. "Interesting. And what about the security cameras? All turned off that night. Someone knew what they were doing." Max continued to inspect the apartment, observing every detail. He noticed a collection of expensive wines, finance books, and modern art on the walls. But something was out of place. A small mud stain near the back door. "Someone was here before us," Max said, pointing to the stain. "Who knew he would be alone?" Brown sighed. "Many, apparently. Lang wasn't exactly a saint. Many enemies in business, and a complicated personal life." Max approached the body, studying Lang's expression. He saw who killed him. This wasn't a common robbery. This was personal. While analyzing the scene, Max heard a whisper coming from the door. It was one of the maids, a young woman named Maria. She looked nervous but determined to speak. "Mr. Detective, can I talk to you?" Max nodded, leading her to a more private corner. "What do you know, Maria?" "I saw someone, a woman. She was here yesterday afternoon, arguing with Mr. Lang. I shouldn't have been listening, but couldn't help it. She seemed furious. I think her name was Claire." Max furrowed his brow. Claire. The name sounded familiar. He needed to find out who she was and what her connection to Lang was. The mystery was just beginning, and each new piece made the puzzle more intricate. Max left the apartment with a heavy feeling in his chest. The rain was still falling, and he knew that tonight would be long. But he was determined to find the truth, no matter how deep he had to dig. Chapter 2. The First Clue. The following morning dawned with a dense fog covering the city, as if the very weather was trying to hide the secrets of the night before. Max Hartman was sitting in his office, the broken pocket watch spinning between his fingers. He knew that this object was the key to understanding what had happened, but he still couldn't see the bigger picture. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Lisa, his faithful assistant, bringing a cup of hot coffee. "Good morning, Max. How was your night?" "Long and full of unanswered questions," he replied, accepting the coffee. "Do we have any progress on the watch?" Lisa nodded, handing over a folder. "I made some calls. The watch is a rare piece, part of an exclusive collection sold at an auction about 2 years ago. The buyer was registered as anonymous, but I managed to get a name, Arthur Donovan." Max raised an eyebrow. "Donovan? The real estate mogul? Does he have any connection to Lang?" "They're in the same social circle, but we haven't found anything specific yet. It could be a lead or a distraction." Max knew he needed to follow this trail. He grabbed his coat and headed to Donovan's office, a skyscraper in the financial heart of the city. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the secretary, an elegant woman who seemed born for that environment. "Mr. Donovan is not available at the moment," she said with a professional smile. "Can I schedule a meeting?" "I'd prefer to wait," Max replied, settling into a leather chair. "I believe he'll want to speak with me." As he waited, Max observed the office's hustle and bustle. People rushing, heated discussions, the constant sound of ringing phones. It was the heart of a business empire, but there was something cold and calculated in the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Arthur Donovan appeared. A middle-aged man with impeccably styled gray hair and a tailored suit. He looked at Max with a hint of curiosity. "Detective Hartman, what can I do for you?" Donovan asked as he led him to his office. Max didn't waste any time. "I'm investigating the murder of Victor Lang. This watch was found at the crime scene. Do you know anything about it?" Donovan picked up the watch, studying it carefully. "Yes, it's mine. I lost it a few weeks ago. I reported the theft, but I didn't think I would get it back." "Where exactly was it stolen?" Max asked, narrowing his eyes. "At a party. One of those big receptions where you don't know half the guests. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary that night." Max knew he needed more than words. He thanked Donovan and left, determined to follow new leads. The watch was a start, but he needed to connect the dots. Back at Lang's apartment, Max found Maria, the housekeeper, waiting for him. "Detective, I remembered one more thing. That night, before he left, Mr. Lang received a phone call. He seemed nervous, mentioned something about the deal. I don't know more details, but I thought I should tell you." Max felt he was getting closer to the truth. Lang was involved in something bigger, something that likely led to his death. But who was pulling the strings? And why? As he left the building, Max encountered a neighbor who lived upstairs. A middle-aged man, visibly tired. "Sorry to bother you," Max began. "But did you hear anything last night?" The man scratched his head, thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, I heard a strange noise like something being dragged, around 3 in the morning. I thought it was my imagination." Max thanked him and returned to his office. Each small clue was starting to form a clearer picture, but he knew there was still much to uncover. The watch, the mysterious woman, the nervous phone call, everything was connected. He just needed to figure out how. As he sat down to review his notes, a feeling of unease washed over him. He was getting close, but with every step he took, he felt the danger increasing. And he was right. Chapter 3: Victor Lang's Dark Past. The morning fog began to dissipate as Max Hartman arrived at his office. The coffee on his desk was already cold, but he didn't mind. He was more interested in the files scattered everywhere, reports on Victor Lang and his obscure financial transactions. It was clear that Lang was not a clean man. His empire had been built on a foundation of betrayals, bribes, and manipulations. Max flipped through the documents until he found a photo of Lang at a charity event. Beside him was a stunning woman he recognized instantly. Claire. The same Claire that Maria, the maid, had mentioned. She was the key to understanding what had happened that fateful night. Determined to follow this new lead, Max went to one of Lang's hangouts, the Noir Lounge. The place was a refuge for the city's elite, with its dim lights, smooth jazz, and atmosphere of decadent sophistication. Max found an old acquaintance, Charlie, the bartender, who had a prodigious memory and a sharp tongue. "Charlie, I need information about Victor Lang and his beautiful wife." "Claire?" Max said, taking a sip of whiskey. Charlie sighed, wiping a glass with an already dingy cloth. "Lang was a regular here. He always liked to flaunt his influence, but he knew most people despised him." "Claire? She's a unique piece. Many say she was only with Lang for the money, but I saw something more. She was afraid of him." "Max? Afraid? That's interesting. Any idea why?" "I heard Lang kept her in check with secrets and threats. She knew too much about his dirty dealings, and he liked to remind her of that. Once, she confided that Lang was involved in something big, something that could take down a lot of powerful people. She never said what it was, but she looked terrified. Max knew he needed to talk to Claire, but finding her wouldn't be easy. He decided to return to Lang's apartment, hoping Maria could provide more information. When he arrived, Maria was heading out to shop. "Detective, I was hoping to see you. I have something that might help," she said, handing him an old diary. "I found this in Mr. Lang's room. He never let anyone touch it. I thought it might be important." Max quickly flipped through the diary. It was a detailed record of Lang's dealings, including names, dates, and amounts. One name stood out repeatedly: Donovan. This confirmed the link between Lang and Arthur Donovan. The conspiracy was starting to make sense. As he analyzed the diary, a loud knock at the door interrupted him. Two men entered, both with hardened expressions and threatening looks. Max recognized one of them as Johnny Lightfingers, a known thug in the city. "Detective Hartman," Johnny said with a sinister smile. "Our boss would like to have a word with you. Now." Max knew that resisting was not an option. He nodded and followed the men to a black car parked outside. The ride was short, but the tension in the air was palpable. They arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, Arthur Donovan was waiting. His previously calculating and cold face now showed a hint of discomfort. "Hartman, I heard you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Max stared at Donovan firmly. "I'm just following the leads, and all of them lead to you, Donovan. What were you trying to hide?" Donovan sighed, looking at Johnny before speaking. "Lang was becoming a problem. He threatened to expose us all. His illegal dealings, our connections. We couldn't allow that. But I didn't kill Lang. Someone acted on their own." "And who would that be?" Max asked, feeling frustration grow. "I don't know. But I can guarantee that if you keep digging, you're going to find yourself in a hole you can't climb out of." Max knew Donovan was hiding something, but he also knew that pressing him now would be risky. He left the warehouse with more questions than answers, but with the certainty that he was getting closer to the truth. And he was ready to face anything to uncover it. Chapter 4. The Encounter with the Femme Fatale. Max Hartman knew he needed to talk to Claire. The enigmatic widow of Victor Lang had secrets that could unravel the mystery. He got her address through some contacts and drove to the mansion in a wealthy neighborhood of the city. Upon arriving, he was met by a wrought iron gate and a long driveway lined with dark trees that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Claire opened the door personally, her tall, elegant figure standing out against the luxurious interior of the house. Her green eyes, cold as jade, met Max's with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Mr. Hartman," she said, a slight smile on her lips. "I'm surprised you came to see me so quickly." "I have some questions, Mrs. Lang," Max replied, stepping into the salon decorated with expensive artwork and tasteful furniture. "I think you can help me understand why your husband was murdered." Claire gestured to an armchair and sat down in front of him, crossing her legs gracefully. "Victor made many enemies. Dirty business, betrayals. It's no surprise someone decided to settle things for good. I heard you argued the afternoon before the murder. What was the argument about?" Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Victor was nervous. He knew something big was about to happen, something that could destroy his empire. He mentioned a deal and accused me of betrayal. But I didn't know what he was talking about. Max noticed a slight tremor in Claire's voice. She was scared, but there was something more. A cold determination that he couldn't ignore. "You mentioned he was involved in something bigger. Can you be more specific?" Claire sighed, looking at a painting on the wall as if searching for answers there. Victor was about to expose a network of corruption involving influential politicians and businessmen. He had documents, concrete evidence. I don't know where he kept it all, but he was ready to use that information as leverage. Before Max could ask more, a knock at the door interrupted the conversation. It was a tall, robust-looking man whom Max recognized as Marco, Claire's personal security. "Sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Lang, but I think the detective should go now. There are things that need to be discussed in private." Claire nodded, but her eyes didn't leave Max's. Please be careful, detective. You are getting involved in something very dangerous. Max left the mansion with a sense of urgency. Claire's words echoed in his mind. He knew he was on the right path, but he also knew the dangers were accumulating. The web of conspiracies was closing in around him, and he needed to find the evidence Victor Lang had hidden before it was too late. As he drove back to his office, Max received a call from Lisa. Max, I just got some important information. There's a warehouse on the outskirts of the city that Lang used to use for storing confidential documents. Could be what we're looking for. Max immediately changed course, heading to the address Lisa had provided. Upon arrival, he found an old, dilapidated building surrounded by a rusty fence. He forced his way in and began to search the place. At the back of the warehouse, hidden under a pile of old boxes, Max found a safe. After a few minutes of trying, he managed to open it. Inside was a stack of documents and a USB drive. He knew this was what Lang had been keeping. As he examined the documents, he heard footsteps outside. Max hid behind a pile of boxes, holding his breath. Two men entered, speaking in low voices. Donovan wants those documents destroyed. We can't leave any evidence behind. Max waited until the men got closer to the safe and, in a swift motion, disarmed them. He grabbed the documents and the USB drive, exiting the warehouse before any backup arrived. Back at the office, Max and Lisa began analyzing the evidence. It confirmed everything Claire had said and more. The corruption network was vast, and many of the names involved were publicly known. We have enough to take them all down, Lisa said, excited. Yes, Max replied. But we need to be careful. Now we are the targets. Max knew the truth was about to be revealed, but he also knew the battle was far from over, and he was prepared to face whatever came next. Chapter 5: False Leads and Real Dangers. The city at night looked like a vast ocean of shadows and secrets. Max Hartman knew he was navigating dangerous waters. With the evidence in hand, he and Lisa were preparing to face the storm that was about to break over them. Lisa was sitting at her desk, her eyes fixed on the computer, analyzing the contents of the USB drive. Max, these documents are a bombshell. Illegal financial transactions, bribes, compromising emails. We have enough material to expose the entire corruption network. Max nodded, but concern was etched on his face. We need to be strategic. We can't just hand this over to the police. There are too many people involved who can make everything disappear. As they discussed their plan, Max felt a strange presence. He stood up and went to the window, looking out at the street below. Two black cars were parked across the street, suspicious-looking men smoking cigarettes and watching the building. He knew he was being watched. Lisa, we need to get out of here. They're watching us. Lisa looked out the window and gasped. What are we going to do? We're going to a safe place. Grab the documents and the USB drive. Let's head to the hideout we used before. The two hurriedly left, taking care not to be followed. They drove through back streets and alleys until they reached an old warehouse that Max used as a hideout. It was a dirty, rundown place, but it was safe. Max and Lisa began working frantically, scanning the documents and sending encrypted copies to trusted journalists and media contacts. They knew they had to act fast before they were discovered. As they worked, Max couldn't shake Claire from his mind. There was something about her that didn't quite add up. She seemed genuine, but there was an air of manipulation that made him suspicious. He knew he needed to find out more about her. In the middle of the night, Max's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered cautiously. Hartman. Detective, it's Claire. We need to meet. Now. Max hesitated. Where? At the Lang's cabin. I'll be waiting. Max decided to go alone, leaving Lisa at the warehouse to continue the work. The Lang's cabin was located outside the city, surrounded by dense woods. Upon arrival, Max found Claire waiting on the porch, an urgent expression on her face. Claire, what's so important that it couldn't wait? She looked at him with wide eyes. I found out something about Victor's murder. There are more people involved than we thought. I'm being followed, Max. They won't stop until they silence us. Max furrowed his brow. Who are they? Before Claire could respond, gunshots echoed through the night. Max pulled Claire inside the house and crouched down, drawing his weapon. He knew they were walking into a trap. The gunfire ceased for a moment, and Max heard footsteps approaching. He looked at Claire. Stay here and don't move. Max crept through the house, using the darkness to his advantage. He saw two armed men entering through the back door. In a swift motion, he disarmed the first and used him as a human shield while shooting the second. The struggle was intense, but Max managed to neutralize both men. He returned to Claire, who was trembling with fear. We need to get out of here. Now. Max and Claire ran to the car and drove back to the city. Max knew time was running out. They needed to reveal the truth before it was too late. Chapter 6. The Conspiracy Revealed. Dawn was breaking as Max and Claire arrived at the hideout. Lisa was waiting, her eyes widening with relief and concern upon seeing Claire with Max. They quickly entered and locked the door behind them. Max, what's going on? Lisa asked anxiously. Someone is trying to silence us, and they won't stop until they succeed, Max replied, still breathless. But now we have Claire. She can help us understand what's really going on. Claire sat down, trembling slightly. Lisa offered her a cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully. After a few moments of silence, Claire began to speak. Victor was involved in a large-scale corruption scheme. Not just bribery, but money laundering, influence peddling. He had everything documented. He was about to expose everything and use the information as leverage. Who else is involved? Max asked, leaning forward. Claire took a deep breath. Arthur Donovan, several politicians, businessmen. They all benefited from the scheme. Victor kept them in check with the evidence he had. But when he decided to use it to bargain, he became a target. Max felt the weight of the revelations. He knew they were dealing with something much bigger than he had imagined. We need to expose this publicly. Take everything to the media at once. Lisa agreed. I've already sent copies of the documents to our contacts in the media. But we need something more concrete to ensure the story isn't buried. Max thought for a moment. What if we can get a confession? Someone involved admitting to the scheme. Claire nodded slowly. If we can catch Donovan on tape, that might be enough. He's arrogant enough to brag, thinking he's untouchable. Max knew it was a risky bet, but he had no choice. He needed to confront Donovan and get him to confess. But how to reach him without getting killed first? We have to do this carefully, Max said. Lisa, you stay here with Claire and keep monitoring the information. I'll need all the support I can get. Lisa looked worried but nodded. Be careful, Max. Max left the hideout and headed to Donovan's building. It was a fortress of concrete and glass, a symbol of the corruption that permeated the city. Max entered incognito, using his knowledge of security routines to avoid detection. He reached Donovan's office and, with stealth, entered through the back door. Donovan was sitting at his desk, talking on the phone. Max hid in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. When Donovan hung up, Max stepped out of his hiding place, gun drawn. Donovan, we need to talk. Donovan looked at Max with surprise and then disdain. Hartman, you're more stubborn than I imagined. What do you think you can accomplish here? I want the truth, Donovan, and you're going to give it to me, Max said firmly. Tell me about the scheme. How did it all start? Donovan laughed. You think you can intimidate me, detective? I'm untouchable. Max knew he needed to play to Donovan's ego. You think you're untouchable, but I've already sent evidence to the media. The entire city will know what you've done. But if you cooperate, maybe you can save some of your reputation. Donovan hesitated, his confidence beginning to waver. Evidence? What evidence? Max pulled a recorder from his pocket. It's all on tape. Your choice is simple. You can be seen as a collaborator trying to redeem yourself, or as the main villain who tried to take everyone down to save his own skin. The tension in the air was palpable. Donovan finally relented. Okay, you win. But know that I'm not the only one. Many others are involved. Max turned on the recorder, and Donovan began to speak. He confessed everything, detailing the scheme, those involved, and how they tried to silence Victor Lang. Max knew he finally had what he needed. As Donovan spoke, Max received a message from Lisa. "The media is ready. We're going to expose everything tomorrow." Max felt a mix of relief and concern. He knew the battle was far from over, but at least now they had a chance to change things. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The city awoke under a dense fog, as if even the weather sensed the storm of revelations about to descend. Max Hartman knew this would be a crucial day. After sending Donovan's confession recording to the media, he and Lisa needed to ensure that all loose ends were tied up. In the hideout, Claire was visibly anxious. "Max, do you really think this will be enough to take them down?" "It has to be," Max replied with determination. "But we need to be prepared for any reaction. They won't accept this easily." Lisa entered the room holding a phone. "Max, we have a problem. I received an anonymous message saying that Donovan and his men are on their way to the hideout. They know where we are." Max felt a chill down his spine. "We have to get out of here. Now." Quickly, they gathered the documents and prepared to leave the place. Max knew they had little time. Just as they were about to exit, they heard the sound of approaching cars. He looked out the window and saw several armed men getting out of the vehicles. "We're surrounded," Claire said, her voice trembling. Max pulled out his gun and looked at Lisa. "Take Claire and go out the back. Find a safe place. I'll hold them off." "Max, no," Lisa protested. "You can't do this alone. We have no choice. Go now." Lisa and Claire ran for the back exit while Max prepared for the confrontation. He knew he was at a disadvantage, but he needed to buy time for the evidence to be released. With one last look at his friends, he positioned himself and waited for the attackers. Donovan's men entered the warehouse with weapons drawn. Max opened fire, forcing them to take cover. The gunfight was intense, each bullet echoing like thunder in the confined space. Max used his skills and knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, moving quickly between the shadows and striking unexpectedly. He knew he couldn't take them all down, but his goal was just to buy time. As the bullets started to run low, he knew he needed an escape plan. With one last effort, Max managed to take down the last two remaining men and ran for the back exit. He knew Lisa and Claire were already far away, but he still needed to shake off any pursuers. Using his knowledge of the streets, he disappeared into the darkness. Meanwhile, Lisa and Claire found refuge in a small motel outside the city. Lisa called her media contacts, confirming that the evidence was being released. Donovan's confession was already being broadcast, and the news was spreading rapidly. "Max did it," Claire said with a sigh of relief. Lisa nodded, but concern was still present in her eyes. But at what cost? Back in the city, Max finally found a moment to rest in a dark alley. He was exhausted, injured, but alive. He knew the battle was far from over, but he also knew they had made significant progress. As Donovan's confession dominated the headlines, the police and journalists began investigating those involved. Several politicians and businessmen were arrested, and the network of corruption began to crumble. Max, Lisa, and Claire knew there was still much work to be done, but at least now they had a chance to fight. The truth was finally coming to light, and justice, though delayed, was being served. Chapter 8. Justice or Revenge? The sun was rising over the city, illuminating the streets with a soft, golden light. Max Hartman, still wounded from the battle the night before, felt the weight of each step as he walked through the streets. News of Donovan's confession and the subsequent arrests was everywhere. But he knew the work was far from over. He arrived at the small motel where Lisa and Claire were hiding. Lisa opened the door, relieved to see Max. "You did it. Everyone is talking about it. The whole city is in shock." Max entered, feeling the fatigue and pain taking over his body. "It's a good start, but we need to ensure that everyone involved is held accountable. This isn't over yet." Claire, sitting in a nearby chair, got up and walked over to Max. "You saved our lives. But what happens now? How can we ensure that justice is served?" Max looked at her, his eyes reflecting the determination of a man who was not willing to give up. Now, we make sure all the evidence gets to the right places. We have to keep pushing the media, honest politicians, and anyone who can make a difference. And we need to protect ourselves. Lisa nodded. We'll send copies of the documents and recordings to all our contacts. They can't ignore this now, and we need to stay out of sight. Donovan and his allies still have resources. As they began to organize the documents and prepare new transmissions, Max's phone rang. It was Lieutenant Brown. Hartman, I saw what you did. The city is boiling. We need to talk in person. Max agreed, setting up a meeting at a discreet cafe downtown. He knew he was exposing himself, but he trusted Brown. He left Lisa and Claire at the motel, promising to return as quickly as possible. At the cafe, Brown was waiting at a table in the corner. The place was nearly empty, with just a few morning customers sipping coffee and reading newspapers. Max approached and sat down, feeling Brown's eyes scrutinizing him. Max, you really turned the city upside down, said Brown with a half-smile. But you did what needed to be done. I'm here to help. We need to make sure all these corrupt people pay for what they've done. We can't let them cover this up, Max said seriously. Brown nodded. I'm already working on that. But there's something else. Donovan is missing, and there are rumors he's trying to flee the country. Max clenched his fists. We can't let that happen. He's the key to dismantling this entire network. Brown agreed. We're monitoring the airports and borders, but we need more information on where he might be hiding. Max thought for a moment. I'll find Donovan. He has to pay for his crimes. Back at the motel, Max gathered Lisa and Claire. Donovan is trying to escape. We need to find him before he disappears. Lisa began making calls using all her contacts. Claire, still scared, offered a lead. Victor had a hideout, a place where he kept secrets and hid when necessary. Donovan might be there. With the new lead, Max and Lisa headed to the location indicated by Claire. It was an old mansion on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by trees and with a sense of abandonment. Max felt a rush of adrenaline as they approached the entrance. Inside the mansion, Max found Donovan, hiding in a luxurious office. Donovan was unarmed, but his gaze was filled with pure hatred. Do you really think you can stop me, Hartman? Donovan said with a bitter laugh. I don't think so. I'm sure, Max replied, aiming his gun. Donovan raised his hands, a cynical smile on his lips. You can arrest me, but this won't end here. There are many others like me. Max stepped closer, keeping the gun steady. Maybe, but each of you will fall one by one. The police arrived shortly after, arresting Donovan and taking him into custody. Max knew this was just the beginning of a long struggle, but he felt victorious for taking a significant step toward justice. Back at the motel, Max, Lisa, and Claire sat down, exhausted but relieved. We did it, Lisa said, smiling. Yes, Max replied, looking toward the horizon. But the fight continues, and we'll be ready for it. As the sun set, Max knew he had chosen the right path. Justice was not easy, but it was necessary, and he was willing to face any challenge to ensure the truth prevailed.